Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Mourning is the price that we pay for having the courage to love other people. Even in grief, we know that the wonder of human life is quite complex. It's magnificent. And it shouldn't be memorialized in endless pain. The gifts of spirit that Glenn gave us, it cannot be measured or weighed. Nor can those gifts be tarnished by time. Even in our darkest hours, we know that some of his light and his warmth will always be with us. It'll bring us comfort, it'll bring us courage, and in the fullness of time, it'll bring us peace. And I know that many of you here are, maybe the word is surprised, shocked by your presence here. Glenn he loved to act. He was in Homicide and The Wire, from what I understand. But one of his best acting jobs of all time was keeping us somewhat out of the loop. He didn't want us to know about what he was going through. And even when it was clear that he was sick, he wanted us to know just how hopeful he was and how confident he was in recovery. And so I think that for some, you didn't even know he was sick, and here you are. For others, you learned that he was sick but had no idea. I think that's so many of us. And together, we all join, hand in hand, arm in arm, caring about the people who are around us because we know that life is precious and fleeting. And if we don't embrace the people we care about the most now, we might miss the chance. Psalm 16 begins, Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. I have set the eternal always before me. God is at my side, I shall not be moved. Therefore does my heart exult and my soul rejoice. My being is secure, for you will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful ones see destruction. You show me the path of life, your presence brings fullness of joy. Enduring happiness is your gift. Indeed, death has taken Glenn, a loved one. I don't think anyone in this sanctuary has truly come to terms with this loss. Our friends grieve in their silent world, lost in their loneliness is tears and a feeling of true disconnect. You see, because Glenn's love united us in life. And we know that his death will not sever that connection that we had. And so for that love, and for his companionship that we shared along life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory, and for the gifts of his heart and his mind, which brought us joy and happiness, and which is now a precious memory. For all these and for more, we give our thanks to God. Consider Psalm 1. It starts, Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach ba'atzat risha'im. Those Hebrew words mean happy is the one who has not followed the counsel of the wicked or taken the path of sinners or joined the company of the insolent. Rather, the teaching of God is his delight, and he studies that teaching day and night. He is like a tree planted beside a stream of water that yields its fruit in season, whose foliage never fades and whose fruit always flourishes. And let me share with you one of the most well-known psalms. And if you would indulge me in about 30 to 45 seconds of context, I think it brings the psalm to life a little bit more. You see, we think that David, as in King David, but he wasn't king at the time, we think David was probably the composer of many of the psalms. And we think that the time of the composition of these psalms was probably when he was fleeing from King Saul. See, King Saul thought that David was out to usurp the throne. People claimed that Saul was paranoid. I think Saul may have been accurate, but regardless, what I know is that David was contemplating his own life and death as he wrote many of these psalms. This one, by the way, that in just a moment we'll read, was probably composed in the town of Ein Gedi, which is on the shores of the Dead Sea, near Masada, the fortress of Masada, a place that Glenn and Sandy visited with me and hiked with me. So, as David, the fact though, now I'm remembering where I was going with this. They said that they wanted a little humor here. I didn't realize that it was going to be at my own expense. So David, as he was writing these psalms, he was being pursued by Saul, and he didn't know if he was going to make it alive or dead. And so that's what makes this one psalm so particularly meaningful, is that it's unclear. It's not so clear whether the psalmist is referring to God as a shepherd for him in life or when he dies. And so let me share with you the Hebrew of Psalm 23, and then afterwards, if you know it, please feel free to join me. So in Hebrew it goes, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binot desha yar bitseni al mei menuchot yinahaleni, nafshi yishovev, yancheni v'ma'aglei tzedek l'ma'an shemo. Gam ki elech b'geit salmavet lo irara ki ata imadi, shivtecha u'mishantecha hema yinachamuni, ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorarai dishanta v'shemen roshi, kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai v'shavti b'veit Adonai lo'orach yamim. Again, if you know this, join me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 121. It begins in Hebrew, Esa Einai El Heharim, Me'ayin Yavo Ezri, Ezri Me'im Adonai Oseh Shamayim Va'aretz. In English, I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from God, the maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. And this one, it feels particularly meaningful because this expression from our tradition or from the Bible is popularized by one of the many musical groups that Glenn loved. I think you'll probably be able to figure out why in a second. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak. And maybe one final expression from our tradition for the time being. It comes from the story of Job. You might be familiar with Job. It's a tragic tale. Here was Job, who was loyal and devoted to God. He was a man who had a farm and had a family and had good health and had sustenance. And every day, Job would thank God for all that he had. Until one day, there was a discussion up in the heavens. Would Job be so grateful and so thankful if you took away all that he had in his life? And God was certain the answer would be yes. And so they checked. And Job had everything taken away: his health, his home, his family, his sustenance, everything. And in his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mivorach. Those words, God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. We are an ancient people. We are well acquainted with grief and with the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us. And yet, the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and that there's strength in faith. And so with Job, and like Job, we too say, Adonai Natan. O God, you have given. You gave us Glenn, a loved one who will not be forgotten. And for all that was good and enduring in his life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. And yet, at the same time, we are forced to say, Adonai lakach. O God, you have taken away from us. And we pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust. So hopefully we can all say, hopefully, that despite the shock and pain we feel right now, despite the numbness that many of us are experiencing at this time, despite it all, like Job, we say, blessed be the name of God. So there are a number of people that will be speaking this afternoon. And fortunately, from various different elements of Glenn's life. And so I would like to call forward our first speaker. And that is his longtime law partner, Tim Murphy. You can come forward here.
So, good afternoon. Like all of you, I'm saddened to be here, and at the same time, I'm honored to be here with Glenn's family, and I'm honored to be Glenn's friend. I have the unique position of being his one and only law partner. This was not my idea. At one of the judicial conferences some years ago, when Chief Judge Barbera was still Chief Judge Barbera, she knew Glenn fairly well, and I had met her and spoken with her many years, over the many years. And Glenn and I were having a conversation in the hallway, and she walked up and began to speak to us. She actually wanted to say something to Glenn. They talked for a minute, and almost as an aside, he realized, and he said to her, "You know, Chief Judge, Tim Murphy was my law partner for 6.5, almost 7 years until he went to the bench." And her reaction was amazing. Her jaw dropped. She put her hand to her mouth and she said, forgive me, Rob, "Oh my God," which I always thought was an indictment of me. But as I thought about it over the weekend, I thought it really was a measure of her concern about Glenn and what had happened to his good judgment if you wanted me as a law partner. Sandy and I talked over the weekend several times, and she invited me to speak, which is very generous of her, probably more than you know. And she said, "I'd like you to speak," and I said, "I'd like to speak. But brevity's not my strong suit, and I know folks have to go back to work, and I'll try and contain this." But she said to me, "This is going to be fairly upbeat, we think. Can you be funny?" And I said, "I hope so. I think I can." She said, "Can you be brief?" And I said, "No, I don't think I can." The rabbi said I have license, so we'll go from there. I'll tell you, Glenn was such a well-rounded lawyer. I mean, he could do everything. You all know this. I mean, he could do business law, he could do domestic law, he could do juvenile law, he could do any kind of litigation. Long before he was a judge, he knew how to do everything. I, on the other hand, was frequently distracted by political ventures. I was from the city council when he wanted me to join him as a partner, and I was frequently absent from the practice of law, another good reason why he probably should not have asked me to practice law with him, but he was insistent about it. He talked to me for weeks and then months, and I kept putting him off. Finally, he called me on a Saturday morning. I'm guessing it was right after shul. And he said, being the good businessman that he was, "I have space for us. I have printed letterhead for us. I have liability insurance for us. All you have to do is say yes." And once again, I began to tell him all the reasons it wasn't a good idea. We shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that. He said, "I'm going to settle this once and for all. I'm going to count backwards from 10. And if you haven't said no by the time I get to 1, we are a law firm." This is absolutely true story. And he said, 10, 9. I said, "Wait, this is not the way things go. 7, 6. I said, "At the very least, you have to," and he hung up the phone. And that was the basis of our partnership for 6.5 years. Now, we were LLC, so for those of you who have business-minded, you'll know that there probably was an agreement that I signed that he put in front of me that created our corporate entity. And when I was appointed to the bench in 1999 and I left, he probably put another paper in front of me to sign. But in truth, that phone conversation, that counting backwards was our friendship, our contract, our measure of commitment to one another. And nobody ever had, as I'm sure you imagine, a better friend or a better law partner. The other thing I have to tell you is about April F. Day. If any of you have ever been the object of one of his pranks, you will understand this. Sandy asked me to mention this. The problem is that April F. Day is an inside joke of 30-plus years standing between Glenn and I. While we were practicing law, as I said, my schedule was fairly erratic. I would frequently be late in the office. He, like a good husband and father, was home having dinner with his kids. One evening, I'm turning the lights off about 7:30, 8 o'clock, looking at everything, and I look at the fax machine to make sure there's nothing left in it. For those of you who are too young, fax machine is... Glenn once told me, the phone in my pocket he bought for me, he told me which to buy. The computer in my home he picked for me. all the mechanical stuff in my life he knows about, because I know nothing of that. He told me one time he was going to drag me kicking and screaming into the technology of the 20th century. And I realized then it was already the 21st century. I looked at the facts late at night, and there was this letter from this irate constituent. This woman claimed that I was her city councilman, and on the fax letter, it wasn't to the law firm, it wasn't to Glenn, it wasn't to the secretary, it was to me personally in my capacity as city councilman, accused me of all kinds of impropriety, being in bed with lobbyists, ignoring my constituents, never going to meetings, voting for zoning laws that made no sense at all. I was furious. So I turned, of course, to my lifetime mentor, friend, advisor, ethics consultant, Glenn Clavins. I call him at home at 7 o'clock at night. I'm ranting on the phone. What do I do about this crazy woman? What do I do with this? He could hardly contain himself. He said, "Did you look at the date on the letter?" I said, "No, I was too angry." He said, "Look at it." And it was dated April 1. And the letter was signed by April F. Day. But the story begins there because I looked at this file. I have an April F. Day file. Over the last 30 years, he has perpetuated this alter ego. I've gotten letters of complaint. I've gotten contractual arrangements some years ago, and I always make the mistake of telling him because he was always my, consultant. When I had a problem with my Comcast bill some years ago, I complained and I said, "What do I do?" 3 weeks later, and it was always on perfectly reproduced stationery, Comcast mail, Comcast stationery, I get this long letter from April F. Day, the consultant. It says, "You're right, we made a mistake. Your actual bill is $16,752 for last month." There is a version of my last will and testament, which, what a surprise, leaves all my earthly belongings to April F. Day. And under Maryland law requiring 2 signatures, 2 witnesses, the witnesses are April F. Day and A.F. Day. What a surprise. I was on the bench for 10 years, and you come up for reconfirmation, and the governor is supposed to renominate you. I get a letter out of the blue one day from Miss Day. It's a copy, supposedly the original, which sent to Governor O'Malley saying, "Don't pay any attention to all those scurrilous things you hear about Judge Murphy and his personal life," because I can attest that he has no personal life. So this went on and on and on, and I won't, there are literally dozens of these things. So I'm grateful for the experience. I love them, as you all did, which is evidenced by your presence here. And I will say this to you, as I'm sure you all know, on a more serious note. Rabbi, you know, and every religion teaches that we are all created equal. Well, we also know something intuitively, which is among us, there are some people who are really just better than the rest of us. And Glenn Clavins was one of those people. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, share some of my odd recollections with him. And I won't say goodbye to Glenn today. I'll just leave you with this. I'm going to count backwards from 10 as I sit down. 10, 9, 8. You have your memories. God bless.
Wow. Tim, thank you so much. What a great, extraordinary kind of journey into that side of Glenn. And when you were told to keep it light, you did a great job, to be perfectly honest. And know, by the way, for those of you here who, and I know there are many who, it's not like you come to funerals that often, or you hope to limit the number of funerals you go to. And you might wonder to what degree it's okay to laugh at a time like this. And I'd like to just make sure to reassure you that this emotion of laughter is a blend of pain of love, a struggle of care. It's everything all mixed together into a giggle and a smile. And we know that this is how Glenn would want to be remembered. I'd like to call upon at this time Judge Robert Thompson. When I said judge, I know a number of people were about to stand up, so I just had to go first name and last name.
I don't know how I'm going to follow Tim Murphy. I promise no stories that are 30 years old, and I also promise no Hebrew. Good afternoon, everyone. At the risk of making this feel like a 12-step meeting, my name is Rob Thompson, and Glenn Clavins is my friend. I have the honor of serving with Glenn as a judge of the Circuit Court for Anne Arundel County. But more importantly, and the reason I'm here, is to share some of my memories of my friend Glenn. Glenn and I would have lunch frequently, though you'll forgive me if at this moment I feel not frequently enough. Sometimes we'd walk to a restaurant near the courthouse, sometimes we'd drive a few miles away, sometimes others would join us, sometimes it would just be the two of us. And we'd talk endlessly about the people we loved and the many blessings that we had in common. We had both married up. We both had beautiful children and grandchildren. And neither of us would ever miss an opportunity to brag about our kids. Jeremy and Julia, your dad loved you so much. And he was so very, very proud of you. We'd share pictures of our grandchildren or talk about our vacation plans. We'd recommend movies and books and shows to each other. And then we'd talk about our mutual ineptitude with home repairs. Once in a blue moon, but the moon had to be very, very, very blue, we'd even talk about work. Sometimes, usually when we were alone, and beyond the gaze of our colleagues or members of the local bar, we'd share a sense of humor that might be much more appreciated by teenage boys than those gathered here on this occasion. Glenn had a certain smile and a glint in his eye that let me know he was thinking exactly what I was thinking, while at the same time serving as a silent reminder that we were skating perilously close to dangerously thin ice. Glenn's sense of humor ran the scale from corny dad jokes to what I will call delightfully naughty. As for any details about that second thing, I want to get this right. On the advice of counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination and respectfully decline to answer any questions. It must have been quite a spectacle, two grown men. There were times we laughed so hard we had tears streaming down our faces. Laugh and your days grow brighter. Laugh and your burden becomes lighter. Laugh and it becomes contagious. Laugh and you become courageous. Laugh and your pain becomes bearable. Laugh and anything is wearable. Laugh and create joy around you. Laugh and touch, if only a few. When there was disagreement at the courthouse, and you know We see more than our fair share of that. Glenn's reputation is that he'd listen carefully and respectfully and diligently, and when possible, make a decision that was designed to benefit both parties, or to do as little harm as possible to either party. And that's what you want from a good judge. If you think about it, that's what you want from a good spouse, a good father, a good brother, a good son, a good friend, a good person. So the Glenn Clavins I know is all of those things, and for that reason, his memory is a blessing to me, especially when I remember the laughter I shared and that devilish smile. My prayer, friends, is that his memory may be a blessing to you as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those beautiful words. Do you guys want to come up together or just by one at a time? So at this time, I'd like to call upon Julia, Glenn and Sandy's daughter.
I was so engrossed, I forgot I was next, so thank you. I didn't get a chance to be nervous because your words meant so much to me. So hello, thank you all for being here. It really, truly means so much to me. My dad. Wow. In the entire world, I was one of only 2 people lucky enough to say that Glenn was my dad. To you, maybe he was an old friend, a neighbor, a judge, that random guy always putzing around up here on the Bema, plugging and unplugging things. But to me, he was my dad. And what a fabulous father he was. Fabulous. Fabulous was one of his favorite words. When he ate a delicious meal, it was, that meal was fabulous. When he saw a play he liked, it was, oh, it was fabulous. He loved with praise, enthusiasm, and delight. Dad loved theater, and a while back he worked both on stage as an actor and off, and he liked running sound and the lights, and he would build sets, and he used to joke in a self-deprecating way that he could build anything to last 10 performances. And yes, it's a funny theater joke, but it's just not quite true. He built many things that lasted a long, long time. He built a marriage with my mom that lasted almost 40 years. He built a family with my brother and me and my mom and cats and a beautiful house in the trees in Severna Park. He built a career as an attorney and a judge based on a foundation of compassion, fairness, and an authentic desire to help people. He was such a helper and a fixer. He could fix anything. He actually did fix some things around the house successfully. He could fix anything from a broken headlight to a broken heart. And he somehow always knew what to do when life fell to pieces. He was tender, sentimental, and gentle. He liked identifying plants, watering an orchid and watching it blossom year after year, and checking the fig trees outside of Temple for fresh fruit. As a father, he was steady and sweet, equally patient and loving towards us as he was towards the many trees he planted over the years. He was even-tempered and kind, always. He gave and gave to his children, affording us every life experience he could. There is simply not enough time to list all the gifts he gave us through education, travel, the arts, and nature. And of course, my dad had a wonderful sense of humor. He once had an orange tabby cat who he named Barump Bump, as in the punchline at the end of a joke, barum bump. And this is for him. He was a relentless punster, and his favorite joke was penned when in search of a snack during a road trip. We pulled over into a Denny's that had a poster up for a peach milkshake. He exclaimed, "Oh, for peach shakes!" And that became a favorite saying of his, and we would groan in response for peach shakes when he would bring it up years later. And I do mean years later. Like last week. And he made this pun like 20 years ago. For years, he drove a minivan, some of you may have seen it, that had a vanity plate that said, "Schlepp 'em." Because he drove us everywhere. So the point of this joke, me telling you this, is not that he was a grown man driving a minivan that said "Schlepp 'em," but not only was he hilarious, but he was brave, because he drove that minivan into Pikesville every Saturday to visit our grandparents, where many Orthodox Jews saw him clearly operating a clearly Jewish car during the Sabbath. And he loved being a part of Temple in the Jewish community. And he passed that down to my brother and me, who have cherished being a part of this temple since nursery school. You might be starting to put together that everything I loved, I inherited from my dad. And that includes summer camp at Timber Ridge, where he was an iconic song leader and friend. As a little camper there myself, I would walk into the gymnasium and look up at all of the painted plaques with names from years past, just squinting to find Glenn Clavins. And when I spotted him, I would just swell with pride and glee. And I still feel that way. I am so very, very proud of my dad. He was a wonderful person. He became a judge at the age of 60 years old, after years of humble, hard work. And recently, I was called for jury duty at his circuit court. And again, I felt pride at being able to point out Glenn Clavins is my dad. And while Dad was enormously respected as a jurist and attorney, he was never high and mighty. One time he was driving my brother and me in Ocean City while Mom was at the state's attorney's convention, and he got pulled over by a cop, and he said, "Officer, please, my wife is a state's attorney and she'll kill me." And he got off with a warning. And in the end, Dad did not get off easy. He deserved many more years of good living. He wanted to be here so much to experience the joy of giggling grandchildren, the most promising year yet for both the Orioles and the Ravens, to see me on stage again, and to travel the world with my mom. But he remained optimistic and calm and thoroughly himself till the end. He was the little boy who dyed satin bridesmaid shoes in his family's bridal shop, the college radio host, the gearhead who reviewed cars for the paper, the handyman, the man of La Mancha, the cook, the tap dancer, the devoted son, the father, and so much more. And I so look forward to learning more about him through all of you. I hope we remember him by doing loving acts of service, making shamelessly cheesy puns, singing with a full voice, eating fabulous desserts, and by taking good care of each other. I love him so very much. Thank you.
Julia, thank you. Jeremy, come.
About a month ago, our family spent a lovely week together in Orlando. My wonderful mother, who takes such deep care of the people around her, especially my father over these last few months, did everything in her power to make this trip happen, to get him down there. My dad loved it. He got to enjoy the warm air and the occasional cool splash of pool water, courtesy of his beloved and a little rambunctious 2-year-old granddaughter. He'd come prepared for this trip, as would any good Eagle Scout. Before he left, with maybe a little help from my mom, he had scoured our house for an old Mickey Mouse-shaped pancake mold that he had used to delight Julia and I when we were just little kids. He had carefully wrapped it and brought it along to Orlando. Even though he was sick and kind of lacking for some energy, he really wanted to make his granddaughter breakfast. For Lily, my daughter, I'm sure a simple round pancake would have been more than enough. She would have loved them. He was a great cook. But for Glenn, for my dad, boring old pancakes weren't enough. Those pancakes had to have ears. That's who he was as a father, a man who always made extra effort to not just show love, but to make joy. That love and joy that he shared so easily built so much and built beautiful communities at camp, at home, at work, a happy, close-knit family, and a family that's continuing to grow. In his communities, he always took the extra step beyond love to make joy for others. Before my time, my father was a camp counselor. I'm sure, like his own children, he treated his campers with an enormous amount of love and kindness. But that wasn't enough for my dad. He also built joy by writing and sharing original songs that have lasted literally through generations. Apparently, also, one time at camp, he brought joy by helping a Hall of Fame pitcher load a goat into somebody's bedroom, but I guess that's what it is. Here at Temple Beth Shalom, it wasn't enough for my father to be a friendly, active member. He also made the extra effort to take up leadership roles on award committees and fix the AV system so that those around him would have a joyful, meaningful experience. In our family, my father always supported our interests and hobbies with an extraordinary amount of love and enthusiasm. He made our interests his own. If Julia loved dance, he loved dance. If I loved soccer, he loved soccer. For him, it was a given that he would volunteer to be an assistant soccer coach. But even that wasn't enough for my dad. He brought extra joy by printing custom hats with the team motto, smart, serious, focused. We were like 8 years old. We didn't need all that, but it made us feel like a real team, and that brought joy to all of us. When we were older, my dad brought joy by tolerating hours of traffic in a single New Jersey parking lot, just because my friends and I told him it might be fun to go see a preseason professional soccer game. And he would have really liked that I was up here complaining about New Jersey traffic. And in our growing family, he cared for his granddaughter with the love and tenderness we all knew he would. He was always there to provide a hug, read a book, build a block tower, sing a song, sneak her a cookie, or keep the sun out of her eyes. But even being the perfect model of Poppy wasn't enough for my dad. Last summer, when he was renovating the steps to our cabin in West Virginia, a cabin that he loved, he took the time to install extra slats on the side railing that were just so close together that no harm could ever befall her. It has been the great joy of my life to experience his boundless love and to participate in the beautiful communities and wonderful family that he helped create. My overwhelming gratitude for having him in my life, for having him as a father, has been at the front of my mind for these last few months. And it certainly was a few weeks ago as I unpacked from that trip to Orlando. As I was unpacking, I found, sitting right on top of my luggage, a carefully wrapped little package. It was the last gift from my father. He's given me many gifts over the years. His time, his love, his energy. But in this package was a perfect gift, that well-worn, well-loved little Mickey Mouse pancake mold. A small, big-eared gift that told me he knew that I'll raise his grandchildren with the same love he showed me, my family, and I'm sure all of you. But it was also a reminder that I should take that extra step to create joy in every small moment. That's what he would have done. And that's what my memories of him will continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. So I'd like to just kind of share a few extra things, elements that are maybe that weren't spoken about here. Even though all of our speakers were eloquent and exquisite, and we're so grateful. So Glenn once was talking to me about the myth of his birth. And he was explaining to me why it was that he came out crying. And it was because he was born on April 19th, 1953, but the day before, April 18th, turns out that Mickey Mantle was rumored to have hit a 565-foot home run, which was the longest of the time, and I think ever. And it was done here in Washington. And Glenn reports about how, I'm just going to turn the microphone down a little bit. Glenn reported about how back then they didn't really have the technology to truly measure the distances of home runs. In fact, at this particular game, I think that they even took a tape measure to measure it, and supposedly that's how they came up with the expression tape measure home runs. In any event, he objected to the distance of 565 so much that he said that he came out crying. So, 1953, he was born, and he was a Baltimorean, but he described it as a Baltimorean and not a Baltimorean. He grew up in Pikesville, and after college at Drew, came back and studied law at the University of Baltimore. He met Sandy in the late 70s when they were forced to share an office space together. And supposedly it's because of that office share, even if it was only for a few weeks, that it was the start of a beautiful, beautiful connection. They were married in 1986 and moved to Severna Park a few years later, just in time to welcome Jeremy and then Julia afterwards. He worked in the state attorney's office and then at a small firm, and we learned about how he then worked with Tim in private practice until 2014 when he was appointed as a judge. Glenn's contributions to the world of law and justice are extensive, and I feel unequipped to speak about them. However, everyone here who knows Glenn knows that there was so much more to him than his legal skills. Glenn was a selfless man, truly selfless. He would drop everything he was doing on a moment's notice for his family, for sure. How many times, it was told to me, did he deliver a forgotten lunch for Julia? How many times was he in this sanctuary before an important event, tinkering with the wires or the knobs or the sound system? In fact, I wondered this morning, I wondered to myself if I would be hearing Glenn's voice in my head as I would be adjusting the volume and adjusting the dials. For his family, he was known to consistently make the extra effort. We heard beautifully about the Mickey Mouse pancake. And we heard about the soccer, the assistant coach, and the scoutmaster. And while Glenn had numerous interests, like his fame as a guitar player, especially at Timber Ridge Summer Camp, the theater and the acting, the O's, the Ravens, and the Colts, that he still had a little bit of a sore spot, the radio, and he had a voice for radio. Still, what made Glenn so much even more interesting was how much he loved trying new things. As Julia mentioned in her Facebook post from yesterday or 2 days ago, I think it was, he embraced the world with open, strong arms. A new hike, a new recipe. Just because he was unfamiliar with it didn't mean he wasn't enthusiastic about it. So there is probably one of the single greatest minds in the history of our Jewish people, whose name was Maimonides. Maimonides was a philosopher, he was a rabbi, he was a doctor. He wrote so many books, and in one of his books he wrote about the qualities that a judge should have. And he said, a judge should have wisdom. Check. A judge should have humility. Check. A judge should have a fear of God. Can't speak to that one exactly, but I can most certainly attest to Glenn's love for God's institutions. Maimonides said that a judge should be a lover of truth. Check. He should have a good reputation, or she. Check. And finally, Maimonides said a judge should be beloved by his people. This room. Check. The psalmist asked the question, who will ascend the mountain of the Lord and who will stand in God's holy place? The answer for us, of course, is Glenn. Glenn, who was generous and goofy and kind. Glenn, who was witty and enthusiastic and smart. Glenn, who was a prankster, yet selfless and present. Glenn, who was dedicated and loving and Jewishly committed. He will certainly ascend God's holy mountain. But more importantly, he will always remain with us because of the lessons and the wisdom and the legacies that he leaves behind for us. And in our tradition, we say, Zecher Tzadik Livracha Me'atav Yad Olam, which means, may the memory of a righteous person always endure among us and with us as a blessing. Amen. So there are just a few elements of the service. In truth, just one element of the service left for here. And then there's one more that we'll do at the cemetery. And we hope that you join us at the cemetery. There's no processional. However, we did leave out cards with the address of Hillcrest Cemetery on the table out in the lobby. And we hope that you'll join us. But I also want to make one more announcement before we conclude here, and that is that we have intentionally left out the address of Shiva, but I'm happy to announce the address here. And that is, if you would like to be a part of Shiva, Shiva is a Jewish tradition of coming and being and comforting a mourning family. They will be observing Shiva for 2 days, today and tomorrow, between the hours of 4 and 8. And we will do a brief service at 7 o'clock on each one of the days, today and tomorrow. So if you'd like to be a part of that, you are most certainly welcome to join. The address is 534 Lakeview Circle in Severna Park. 534 Lakeview Circle. So our service here in the synagogue concludes with one final prayer, and that is a prayer called El Malei Rachamim. It's a prayer in which we ask God to comfort Glenn and guide him on his journeys and to be a companion and a protector for him. It's a blessing which customarily those who are present would be standing for, and so I'd like to invite everyone to please rise. This final prayer is one that we personalize for Glenn. We insert his Hebrew name, which was Leib Nea Chaim ben Label Valeah. El Malei Rachamim Shochen Bamromim Hamitzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina Im Kedoshim Torim Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim et Nishmat Leib Nea Chaim ben Label Shalach Lo Lamo Baal Rachamim Yastirehu B'Seter Kanafav Lo Lamim Vitzror Vitzror Chaim et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato V'yanuach B'Shalom Amishkavo V'nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Leib Nea Chaim ben Label Valeah, Glenn Clavins, the son of Lorraine and Lee, for he has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. So again, just a reminder, Shiva begins at 4 o'clock to 8 tonight and tomorrow. We'll be going to the cemetery. There is not a processional to the cemetery, so you have the addresses on a card out in the lobby. We hope that you join us at the cemetery that's more of a brief experience at the cemetery. I thank you all very much for being here. And I would just like to ask that you allow the family to exit the sanctuary first, and then you're welcome to follow them out afterwards. Thank you so much for being here.